Thanks to the South Bay Cities COG and especially to immediate past chair Kristen Horvath for inviting me to participate. I'm Kristen Torres Pawling with the LA County Chief Sustainability Office, and I'm excited to be joining you all today. I want everyone to take out their cell phones. I know you've been checking it. You're going to probably check it throughout my talk anyway, so I might as well just get it out. Now that you have it in your hands, look at your wallpaper. What's the picture that's on your lock screen or background? Maybe a pretty sunset, portrait of your spouse, faces of your smiling kids. On my personal phone, I have a picture of my daughter that I took on September 9th of last year. She was 4.5 months old. I'd just taken her out of the bathtub. She was wrapped up in a cute footed towel. So to me, an extremely cute picture. You know, I think she's obviously the cutest baby in the world, but empirically, nothing super special. Sort of a run-of-the-mill picture of her in her daily life. So why do I have that particular photo? Well, it was the only picture I took of her that day. Basically, as soon as I got her dressed, I spent the rest of the day glued to the news, seeing this imagery of the West Coast on fire and the subsequent ash and dire air quality ramifications of those fires. I also have another phone. I have my work phone. I have a picture on that one too. It's the total contrast to that cute bath time picture, but it's from the same day. It's the orange sky that enveloped the Bay Area on that particular day. It's from the Bay looking on to the skyline of San Francisco. So why did I go with those pictures from that particular day? There was all kinds of very memorable days in 2020. Well, because those fires across California and beyond really exacerbated my feelings of being trapped. I thought, as a first-time mom struggling to take care of a child while working from home in a pandemic, I kind of knew what it meant to be confined to your house. It turns out that when your only respite from that is occasionally opening up your sliding glass door to take a quick break or doing a short walk around the neighborhood, when you even take those possibilities away, it's a whole new level. I couldn't do really anything to fix it. All I could do was make sure my air filter was clean and that our windows were sealed shut. And luckily, we just finished upgrading our windows. And we were limiting the use of our gas stove as much as possible to make sure we weren't making our indoor air quality bad as we strove to keep the unhealthy levels of air pollution out. So I used to work as an air pollution specialist for the state. So I was acutely aware of just how unsafe those levels of pollution were for developing lungs. It's pretty scary. And I was especially surprised at how many parents of young children didn't know that. As that week of terrible air quality continued, the sky started looking better eventually, and the news started reporting about the levels were safer to go out again. But I knew that I had to pay attention to those air quality index levels even more closely for those sensitive groups, as they're called, which include young children. Those levels didn't return to safe for even more days after, when people sort of thought it was safe to go outside, just sort of by visuals. So we didn't go outside once for about 5 days. That was pretty rough. In the midst of all this, my team at the Chief Sustainability Office happens to be kicking off a new effort to analyze climate vulnerabilities throughout the county. About a year before, we'd heard from stakeholders around the county and from our colleagues within the county that getting a more in-depth grasp of how climate change would impact people and infrastructure was essential. Lots of those kinds of studies have been done before, but none at the scale of LA County, and none in a way that was considering both the social implications and the physical infrastructure implications. Just so happens that we planned our very first public meeting on what we're calling the Countywide Climate Vulnerability Assessment on September 10th, so a day after I took those pictures. And as a climate change expert, I'm hyper aware of why we are experiencing record-setting fire and after record-setting fire, that this question of who and what is impacted and where is one that not enough of us are thinking about or asking with enough urgency, as this work is now revealing. And I think September 2020 began to really hit that home for us and illustrate it in a new way. or at least for me. So for example, I don't live in a part of LA that would show up as high wildfire risk. My wildfire risk is very close to zero if you look at the state maps that we all rely on in this space. Much like the case for many parts of the South Bay. The Palos Verdes Peninsula does, of course, have wildfire risk. So that would show up when you look at existing maps. But as we're now experiencing, we are understanding a new intensity to the increasing likelihood that our air quality will be impacted by regional wildfires. Really not much of the current approach to climate planning properly accounts for that. Now, what sets the South Bay Cities COG apart is that your leadership had the foresight to do a climate adaptation plan that was published in 2019. The climate adaptation plan was an early regional strategy to take seriously the risks facing your communities and thinking specifically about what the role of a council of governments is in this space. If you haven't read it or your staff hasn't read it, you should have them take a look. It has a lot of good details and maps that are specific to your cities and how COG will lead on actions requiring regional coordination. In fact, we thought it was so well done that some of the folks who helped put it together are now part of the team helping us put ours together. But I'll tell you that the space of assessing how climate change is exposing vulnerabilities is rapidly evolving. Just look at what's happened in Texas with basically an entire state's electricity generation and distribution systems offline due to extreme temperatures. There were probably some voices out there suggesting that electricity reliability in that state was vulnerable to climate change, but I don't think anyone envisioned the human suffering and costs it's taken on the residents of that state. So I think we all need to be spending some time picking apart and bringing our own experiences and expertise to this conversation about preparing for climate change. In that vein, let me bring us back to my air quality woes and this county climate vulnerability assessment that we're undertaking now. If you go off of the maps of wildfire risk, again, much of the LA area technically shouldn't be concerned. But if you think of the secondary impact of wildfires, nearly all of our communities light up as being impacted. And so basically the impact of the impacts, that's where we need to be focusing. And meaning that needs to be reflected in your cities and the planning for climate change. I looked at the COG's plan and flipped to that wildfire risk section, and the word air quality is only mentioned once. That's not a knock on the plan, it's a knock on the lack of data that was available when the COG's team was working to put on the plan, or put together the plan. The plan was meant to be data driven, so that reflected the situation. And that's a lesson that we're looking at now, focusing on the secondary impacts of climate change as we do our assessment. Another early finding that we've pulled together is from some new data and experiences is around worker safety during climate events. New research out of UCLA is showing serious economic ramifications of worker injury due to high heat events. And that's not exclusive to workers who might first come to mind, like say mail carriers and utility workers who do their job exclusively outdoors. The data is starting to reflect how people who are technically indoors but might have limited access to cool air are just as likely to experience issues or maybe more during extreme heat. For example, how many of you have auto repair shops in your cities? Probably high share of you. Those workers aren't technically classified as outdoor, but they do have limited ability to get away from poor air quality and extreme heat. So now let's crack open that section of the COG's adaptation plan. There is a chapter on outdoor workers. But now this new experience is showing us, what about those other kind of workers in the South Bay who might not technically be outdoors, but have limited access to air conditioning? I'm thinking specifically for the South Bay manufacturing workers. Again, that's not a knock on the COG's plan, but more of a group realization that climate is permeating more of our economy and lives than we thought possible even just 2 years ago. One other area that's cropped up in this very intersectional climate adaptation planning space is the involvement of the financial sector. At the county, we've had a credit rating agency ask us about our plans to respond to climate change. So, and in 2019, we were able to maintain our highest bond rating because we actually had a response to that. Moreover, I'm on the state's climate and insurance working group, representing the LA area and local governments. Who else is at that table? The head of the California Insurance Industry Group, the international reinsurance companies, other heavy hitters like that. Just to illustrate this further, one of the companies recently told me that they now have address level data about climate risk. The sophistication from the financial sector is getting quite high here because they understand those risks, or want to better understand the risks, understanding that there's real dollars at stake. Moody's now owns the country's most advanced climate adaptation modeling firm. And very few adaptation plans at the local level consider the role of, say, insurance and the financial sector in their plans, the county included. So where do we go from here? All of your cities are required to do some level of climate adaptation planning work while updating the safety elements in your general plans. So I invite you to ask your city managers and planning directors where they are in this work. Have they considered doing your own city climate adaptation plan? Are they prepared to explain to credit rating agencies your city's plans for being resilient in the face of climate change? So I started by sharing about a hopeful picture from the day, that day that I mentioned, a picture of my daughter. I shared that because while the days for us to both zero out our climate emissions and plan for the impacts that we already know are coming, those days are waning. But I still fundamentally believe it's possible to avoid, these bigger calamities, but we have to start acting now. That's why I have my daughter's picture on the phone to remind me that she's only going to be 69 years old in the year 2099, which is the year that most climate models go out to. That's sort of the end of century timeline that we're using in our climate vulnerability assessment. So she'll still be living her life then, hopefully, and I want to make sure that we're in a good scenario and not the dire one, so she can have the luxury of putting a lovely palm tree and a pretty beach on her phone or whatever fancy device she'll be carrying around then. So with that, I want to thank you all for your time and to let you know that we and your COG staff are a resource in this space, and that feel free to reach out to us and your COG staff about questions related to how to prepare for climate change. Thank you all, and have a great rest of the conference.